The mining ship, Void Cutter, had been drilling into Luna's dark side for 3 weeks when everything went wrong. Captain Vextai watched his drill readings spike into impossible numbers. The tungsten bit, designed to cut through solid rock, suddenly dropped into empty space. "What the hell?" muttered his chief engineer, a four-armed Krathari named Blix. "There's a massive hollow space down there." Vextai's scales rippled with excitement. Hollow spaces meant potential treasure, and treasure meant profit. "Send down the probe." The first images that came back made everyone on the bridge go silent. The probe's lights revealed a chamber so vast their scanners couldn't find the far walls. But it wasn't the size that shocked them. It was what filled the space. Geometric patterns covered every surface, glowing with soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The walls seemed to be made of some material that shifted between metal and crystal, reflecting the probe's lights in ways that hurt to look at. Strange symbols moved across the surfaces, rearranging themselves as if they were alive. "Get me Dr. Illa," Vextai ordered. "Now." Dr. Illa arrived within the hour, her excitement barely contained. As the galaxy's leading expert on dead civilizations, she had spent her life studying ruins. But this was different, this was pristine. "Lower me down," she demanded, already suiting up. "I need to see this with my own eyes." The descent took 20 minutes. When Illa's boots touched the chamber floor, her scanner immediately started screaming warnings. The energy readings were off the charts, not dangerous, but powerful beyond anything she'd ever encountered. "Vextai, are you seeing this?" she whispered into her comm. "These walls aren't just decorated, they're alive. The patterns are moving, responding to my presence." She walked deeper into the chamber, her suit lights creating dancing shadows on the impossible architecture. Every step revealed new wonders. Pillars that seemed to twist through dimensions, floors that felt solid but looked like flowing water, and everywhere those symbols watching her like eyes. But it was what she found at the chamber's heart that changed everything. A crystalline pod sat on a raised platform, frost covering its transparent surface like morning dew. Inside, perfectly preserved as if sleeping, lay a creature that made Illa's blood run cold. It was small by galactic standards, maybe 2 meters tall, with pale skin and dark hair. Its limbs were thin, but looked surprisingly strong. The face was almost childlike in its smoothness, but there was something about it that spoke of terrible age. "Impossible," Illa breathed. "It can't be." Every child in the galaxy knew the stories. 10,000 years ago, a species called humans had appeared from nowhere and conquered half the known worlds in less than a century. They had technology that seemed like magic and a way of fighting that turned entire star systems into graveyards. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. No one knew what happened to them. Most assumed they had destroyed themselves. But here was proof. They had existed. And more than that, this one was still alive. Illa's scanner confirmed what her eyes couldn't believe. Neural activity, cellular regeneration. Somehow, impossibly, this human was in perfect health after millennia of sleep. "Dr. Illa," Vextai's voice crackled through the comm. "What did you find down there?" She couldn't answer. Her hands shook as she took readings, each scan revealing more impossible data. The human's brain activity was unlike anything in the galactic databases. Its cellular structure was so dense it should have collapsed under its own weight. And the energy signature, it was like standing next to a star. "Doctor?" Vextai's voice was getting worried. "Talk to me." Illa opened her mouth to respond when every piece of equipment in the chamber began to hum. The symbols on the walls started moving faster, swirling in patterns that made her dizzy. The crystalline pod began to glow brighter, and inside the pod, the human's eyes slowly opened. They were dark, almost black, but they seemed to hold the light of distant stars. When they focused on Illa, she felt like she was being examined by something far older and more dangerous than anything she had ever encountered. The human sat up slowly, ice crystals falling from its hair like snow. It looked around the chamber, with confusion, then at Illa with curiosity. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that her universal translator struggled to process. "How long?" it asked in a language that predated galactic civilization. Illa found her voice. 10,000 years." The human nodded slowly as if this wasn't surprising. Then it smiled, and Illa realized with growing horror that every piece of monitoring equipment in the facility had just died. The galaxy's greatest nightmare had just woken up. The human moved with fluid grace as he sat up in the crystalline pod, each movement precise and controlled. Ice crystals scattered from his dark hair like tiny diamonds, melting the moment they hit the chamber's warm air. His skin had a pale, almost translucent quality that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Dr. Illa watched in fascination and growing terror as the being stretched muscles that hadn't moved in 10 millennia. There was no stiffness, no confusion about his surroundings. It was as if he had simply taken a short nap instead of sleeping through the rise and fall of entire civilizations. When he spoke, his voice resonated through the chamber in ways that defied physics. The sounds seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the walls, the floor, even through Illa's bones. Her universal translator, a device that could handle over 50,000 languages, struggled and sparked as it tried to process the ancient words. "I am Day," he said, the name carrying weight like a falling star. "Star-Annihilator Class 7. Current threat assessment required." The words hit Illa like a physical blow. Her legs nearly gave out as the implications crashed through her mind. Star-Annihilator was a term she had seen only once, buried deep in the most restricted archives of the Galactic Historical Society. It was a classification that had been systematically erased from most records, deemed too dangerous for general knowledge. There is no threat," she managed to stammer, her voice barely a whisper. "Your species has been extinct for 10,000 years. You're the last extinct." The single word changed everything. Day's expression shifted from calm curiosity to something far more dangerous. His dark eyes, which had seemed almost human in their gentleness, suddenly blazed with an inner fire that made Illa step backward instinctively. In that instant, across the galaxy, sleeping giants began to wake. On the dead world of Xerion Prime, buried beneath kilometers of accumulated dust and debris, ancient machinery hummed to life for the first time in millennia. Energy signatures that had been dormant since before recorded history suddenly blazed across sensor networks like newborn stars. The mining station's communication array exploded in a cascade of emergency signals. Every deep space monitoring station within 100 light-years detected the same impossible readings. Massive power sources were activating simultaneously across dozens of star systems, all responding to some invisible signal that originated from Luna's hidden chamber. Captain Vextai's voice crackled through the comm system, filled with panic. "Dr. Illa, every sensor in the system just went crazy. What's happening down there?" But Illa couldn't answer. She was too busy watching Day as he stepped out of the crystalline pod with movements that seemed to bend reality around him. Each footstep left glowing prints on the chamber floor, and the strange symbols on the walls began moving faster, swirling in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "You built your cities on our graves," Day said softly, but his voice carried through the chamber like thunder. "You strip-mined our worlds, you forgot us completely." Far above them, in the sterile halls of the Galactic Council headquarters on Proxima Station, emergency sessions were being called. Admiral Kenth, the Council's military advisor, burst into the main chamber, where the 12 species representatives were already gathering in panic. "The deep space arrays are detecting massive energy spikes across 17 sectors," he announced without preamble. "Whatever's causing this is bigger than anything we've ever recorded." Councillor Vrex, an ancient Zephyrian whose family had served the Council for generations, pulled up classified files that hadn't been accessed in centuries. Her tentacles trembled as she read data that had been sealed away for good reason. "It's them," she whispered, her voice filled with dread. "The humans, they're waking up." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of emergency lighting. Every representative knew the stories, the legends that parents told their children to make them behave. Tales of a species so dangerous that the galaxy itself had conspired to make them disappear. But they weren't legends, they were warnings. The archives revealed the truth that had been hidden for 10,000 years. Humans hadn't destroyed themselves in some catastrophic war. They hadn't been conquered by superior forces. They had been contained, locked away in facilities scattered across the galaxy, because their very existence was a threat to every other form of life. The human military doctrine was elegantly simple and absolutely terrifying. Any species that posed a threat to humanity would be completely annihilated. Not defeated, not conquered, wiped from existence so completely that even their memory would fade. Back in the lunar chamber, Day stood before a wall covered in flowing symbols, his hand pressed against the surface. The patterns responded to his touch, rearranging themselves into new configurations that pulsed with increasing energy. "How many of us remain?" he asked without turning around. Illa's scanner was screaming warnings as energy levels in the chamber continued to climb. I don't know. The records say you were all destroyed." Day finally turned to face her, and Illa saw something in his expression that made her blood freeze. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was disappointment, the look of a parent discovering their children had burned down the house while they were away. "We weren't destroyed," he said quietly. "We were sleeping, waiting, and now you've woken us up." Across the galaxy, more installations continued to power up, their signals creating a network of communication that spanned star systems. The humans were talking to each other, sharing information, coordinating responses. And in the depths of space, things that had been dark for millennia began to move. Captain Roth had commanded the Hegemony's Third Fleet for 20 years, and he thought he had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. Pirates, rebels, even the occasional rogue AI. Nothing had prepared him for the message that came through his command console at 0347 hours. "Sir, emergency transmission from Kepler Sector Command," his communications officer announced, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "3 star systems have gone completely dark. No communications, no sensor readings, nothing." Roth frowned as he pulled up the tactical display. The Kepler sector was one of the most heavily populated regions in hegemony space, home to over 40 billion citizens across dozens of worlds. Systems didn't just go dark. Define dark, Lieutenant. Complete communications blackout, sir. No distress signals, no automatic beacons, no orbital traffic control. It's like the entire sector just stopped existing. Before Roth could respond, his sensor operator's voice cut through the bridge chatter. "Captain, I'm detecting massive energy signatures from previously dead worlds throughout the sector. The readings are unlike anything in our databases." Roth's blood ran cold. Dead worlds were dead for a reason. Stripped of resources, atmospheres burned away, or simply too hostile for life. But his sensors were showing power outputs that rivaled small stars coming from planets that had been barren rock for millennia. "Set. Course for the Kepler sector, maximum speed," he ordered, "and send word to Fleet Command. Tell them we may need reinforcements." The journey took 18 hours, and with each passing minute, the situation grew worse. More dead worlds were lighting. Up across the galaxy, their energy signatures forming a pattern that stretched across dozens of sectors. Whatever was happening, it was coordinated on a scale that defied comprehension. When the Third Fleet finally reached the edge of Kepler space, what they found changed everything. The first sign of trouble was the debris field where Kepler Station should have been. The massive orbital platform home to 12 million people was simply gone. Not destroyed, gone. There was no wreckage, no radiation signatures, no trace that it had ever existed except for the empty space where it should have been. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, voice shaking, "I'm reading massive installations on the surface of Kepler 7. The planet's been classified as dead for over 2,000 years. On the main view screen, Kepler 7 looked nothing like the barren rock in their navigation charts. The planet's surface crawled with geometric structures that pulsed with their own light. Towers that stretched into the upper atmosphere twisted, through dimensions that hurt to look at directly, and everywhere energy readings that made their instruments scream warnings. "Those installations," Roth whispered, "how long have they been there?" "Unknown, sir. But they're definitely not in any of our historical records." That's when they received the transmission that would haunt Roth for the rest of his life. It came from the installations themselves, broadcast on frequencies that shouldn't have been, able to penetrate their shields. You are trespassing on human territory. Withdraw immediately or face annihilation." The bridge fell silent. Humans were extinct. Everyone knew that. They were legends, stories told to frighten children. But the voice that spoke was unmistakably human, carrying harmonics that their universal translators recognized as an ancient Earth dialect. "This is Captain Roth of the Hegemony Third Fleet," he responded, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're responding to a distress call. What happened to the people in this sector?" The answer came not in words but in demonstration. The Hegemony Dreadnought. Sovereign's Pride was approaching one of the awakening installations, its captain no doubt thinking the same thoughts as Roth. It was a kilometer-long warship, armed with weapons that could crack moons and defended by shields that had never been penetrated. Roth watched on his view screen as the mighty vessel simply ceased to exist. There was no flash of weapons fire, no explosion, no debris field. One moment the Sovereign's Pride was there, its hull gleaming in the light of Kepler's star. The next moment there was empty space. Not even atoms remained to mark where 3,000 crew members had lived and died. "Dear gods," someone whispered on the bridge. Meanwhile, deep beneath Luna's surface, Day stood before a holographic display that showed the entire galaxy in real time. Dr. Illa watched in growing horror as he studied the tactical information, flowing in from awakening installations across known space. "You built your cities on our graves," Day said softly, his voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of sleep. "You strip-mined our worlds. You turned our memorial sites into industrial complexes. You forgot us completely." Illa tried to find words, tried to explain that they hadn't known, that the historical records had been lost or destroyed. But Day raised his hand, and she fell silent. Across the galaxy, more installations came online in response to his gesture. On worlds that had been written off as dead rocks, ancient machinery hummed to life. Weapons that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously began charging. Ships that moved through space by convincing reality they were already at their destination started emerging from hidden bays. The technology was beyond anything the current galactic civilizations could comprehend. Where other species built guns that fired projectiles, humans had created weapons that simply decided their targets no longer existed. Where others built ships that pushed through space, humans had built vessels that stepped outside the normal flow of time and space entirely. "Your people," Day continued, his dark eyes reflecting the holographic star map, "have spent 10 millennia playing with toys. You think your dreadnoughts are powerful because they can destroy cities. You think your shields are strong because they can stop plasma bolts." He gestured to the display, where more hegemony ships were approaching human installations across dozens of systems. "You have no idea what real power looks like." Dr. Illa's scanner was picking up energy readings that broke every known law of physics. The installations weren't just defending themselves. They were rewriting local spacetime to make defense unnecessary. Why build shields when you could simply exist in a dimension where enemy weapons couldn't reach you? "Please," Illa whispered. "There are billions of innocent people out there. They don't know what happened. They're not responsible for..." "Innocent?" Day turned to look at her, and for a moment his expression softened. "Perhaps, but ignorance is not protection. And responsibility." He looked back at the display, where another hegemony fleet was approaching a human installation. "Responsibility belongs to those who choose to treat our graves as their playgrounds." The approaching fleet met the same fate as the Sovereign's Pride. 12 ships gone in an instant, as if they had never existed at all. The galaxy's military might was discovering a terrible truth. When you're fighting an enemy that treats the laws of physics as suggestions, conventional warfare becomes meaningless. And this was just the beginning. The emergency session of the Trilateral Alliance had been going for 6 hours when Admiral Corvin finally slammed his fist on the table. The massive hegemony commander's face was red with fury and fear as he stared at the holographic displays showing the devastation across 17 sectors. "We can't just sit here and watch our fleets disappear," he growled. "Every hour we wait, more of our ships vanish like they never existed. Whatever these humans are, we need to strike first before they get stronger." Chancellor Vrex of the Zephyrian Republic coiled her tentacles nervously. "Admiral, we don't even understand what we're facing. Our best scientists can't explain how. They're making our ship simply cease to exist." "I don't care how they're doing it," Corvin shot back. "I care about stopping it. The source of all these activations is Luna. We hit that moon with everything we have, and this nightmare ends." High Counselor Than of the Kristani Empire, normally the voice of reason, found himself nodding. "The Admiral has a point. If we can destroy their command center before more installations wake up." It was the worst decision in galactic history. Within 12 hours, the largest military fleet ever assembled was moving toward Earth's solar system. 2,000 ships from 3 different species, armed with weapons that could shatter planets, dreadnoughts that had never tasted defeat, carriers loaded with fighters that could darken entire star systems. The combined might of half the galaxy, all focused on one small moon. Admiral Corvin stood on the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Eternal Vengeance, watching Earth grow larger on his view screen. The blue and green world looked peaceful, almost innocent. It was hard to believe that such beauty had given birth to monsters. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy readings from Luna," his sensor operator reported. "The entire moon is lighting, up like a star." "I don't care if it lights up like a supernova," Corvin snarled. "We're ending this. All ships prepare to fire on my command." But deep beneath Luna's surface, in a command center that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, Day was no longer the confused sleeper who had awakened 3 days ago. The transformation was complete. He stood before control panels that bent space around them, his movements fluid and precise as he interfaced directly with systems that had been waiting 10,000 years for this moment. Dr. Illa watched in terror and fascination as Day's consciousness expanded across the galaxy. Through quantum entanglement networks that operated faster than light, he could see and control every human installation that was coming online. His awareness stretched across dozens of star systems, processing information at speeds that would have burned out any other mind. "They're coming," he said softly, his voice carrying harmonics that made the chamber's walls vibrate. 2,000 ships. They mean to destroy this facility." "Can you stop them?" Illa whispered, though part of her already knew the answer. Day's expression didn't change as his fingers moved across controls that shouldn't have been able to exist. "Dr. Illa, in the 3 days since I awakened, how many of your colleagues have died?" The question caught her off guard. What do you mean?" "The archaeological teams, the xenobiologists, the historians who came to study our installations. How many have your military leaders killed in their panic?" Illa's face went pale as she realized what he was asking. Reports had been flooding in from across the galaxy, archaeological sites that had been declared off-limits by military commanders, research teams that had been ordered to evacuate, sometimes at gunpoint. And yes, there had been casualties, scientists who had refused to abandon their work, killed by nervous soldiers who saw threats everywhere. 17 confirmed deaths, she admitted quietly. "Maybe more. The military is treating all human sites as weapons platforms." 17. Day's voice carried the weight of mountains. 17 people who died trying to preserve knowledge, trying to understand instead of destroy. Above them, the Trilateral Alliance fleet had reached firing position. 2,000 ships arranged in perfect formation, their weapons charging for a simultaneous strike that would turn Luna into cosmic dust. "Sir, all ships report ready," came the voice of Admiral Corvin's tactical officer. "Weapons locked on target." "Fire," Corvin commanded. Nothing happened. On 2,000 ships, weapons that had never failed simply refused to activate. Engineering crews scrambled to check systems that showed green across the board, but wouldn't respond. Captains shouted orders that their ships couldn't carry out. And then, slowly, impossibly, the entire fleet began to stop moving. It started with the smaller ships, frigates and destroyers that simply hung motionless in space as if caught in invisible amber. Then the cruisers, their massive engines straining against something that wasn't there. Finally, even the mighty dreadnoughts, ships the size of cities, came to a complete halt. Admiral Corvin watched his instruments in growing horror as his ship's momentum bled away to nothing. "What's happening? Why aren't we moving?" His answer came from Luna itself, broadcast on frequencies that reached every ship simultaneously. Dai's voice filled the bridge, calm and terrible in its certainty. "You killed the archaeologists," he said, each word carrying the weight of sleeping giants. Dr. Iller was trying to protect our heritage. Professor Van died defending a historical site on Kepler 7. Dr. Zeth was executed for refusing to leave a human memorial. 17 scholars who sought only knowledge, murdered by those who choose ignorance. On the viewscreen, Admiral Corvin could see Luna's surface changing. The geometric patterns that had been hidden beneath dust and debris for millennia were rising, revealing technology that made his dreadnought look like a child's toy. "For 10,000 years, we slept peacefully," Day continued. "We harmed no one. We asked for nothing but to be left in peace, and when we finally awakened, what did we find? Our graves robbed, our world strip-mined, our history erased. The Admiral tried to give orders, tried to activate emergency systems, tried anything to get his ship moving. Nothing worked. It was as if the laws of physics had simply decided that his fleet was no longer allowed to move. And when scholars tried to preserve what little remained of our legacy, you killed them. That's when it began. Starting with the outermost ships and working inward, the Trilateral Alliance fleet began to dissolve. Not exploding, not burning, not breaking apart. Dissolving. Hull plates separated into their component molecules. Weapons systems unraveled at the atomic level. 2,000 ships that had taken centuries to build simply came apart like puzzles being gently disassembled. Admiral Corvin had just enough time to understand what was happening before his own ship began to dissolve around him. The last thing he saw was Earth, beautiful and blue against the starfield, as peaceful as it had been for 10,000 years. In the Lunar Command Center, Day's hands finally stilled on the alien controls. Where 2,000 ships had been, there was now only empty space and slowly dispersing clouds of atoms. "The reckoning has begun," he said quietly, and this was mercy. Dr. Iller stared at the displays showing the dissolution of the fleet. Mercy? They died instantly, painlessly. They didn't suffer. Day turned to look at her, and she saw something in his dark eyes that made her blood freeze. The next ones who threaten our heritage won't be so fortunate. Across the galaxy, more human installations were coming online, and now they knew that their sleeping guardians were awake, aware, and absolutely ruthless in protecting what remained of their legacy. The galaxy had made its choice. Now it would live with the consequences. The surrender came exactly 26 hours after the Trilateral Alliance fleet had dissolved into cosmic dust, not because the Galactic Council was quick to admit defeat, but because they literally had no choice left. Chancellor Vrex sat in her private chambers aboard the Council's flagship, staring at reports that made no sense. In a single day, half of the galaxy's military might had simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed in glorious battle, not defeated by superior tactics, just gone, as if someone had reached out and erased them from reality itself. "Ma'am," her aide whispered, tentacles trembling as he held out another data pad. "The Hegemony's fourth fleet just disappeared near the Antares installation. That's their last fleet, Chancellor." Vrex closed her eyes. The Hegemony had been the galaxy's dominant military power for 3 centuries. Their fleets had conquered star systems, ended wars, kept the peace through overwhelming force, and now they had nothing left but cargo haulers and civilian transports. The same story was playing out across every major civilization. The Cristani Empire's proud armadas had vanished while approaching human sites. The Zephyrian Republic's defense fleets had dissolved when they tried to establish blockades around awakening installations. Even the smaller powers had lost everything they sent against the ancient facilities. It wasn't war. Wars had strategy, tactics, winners and losers. This was something else entirely. A force so beyond their understanding that resistance was meaningless. "Open a channel to Luna," Vrex said finally, her voice heavy with defeat. "All frequencies, we need to talk." The response came immediately, as if Day had been waiting for the call. His voice filled the council chambers, calm and patient, carrying those strange harmonics that made their translators struggle. "You wish to surrender," he said. It wasn't a question. "We wish to negotiate," Vrex replied, trying to maintain some dignity. "No." The single word cut through her hopes like a blade. "You will surrender unconditionally, or more of your people will cease to exist. There is no negotiation." Within hours, representatives from every major civilization were racing toward Earth's solar system. Not in warships, they didn't have any left, but in diplomatic vessels flying flags of truce that meant nothing to someone who could erase fleets with a thought. The meeting took place in the very chamber where Dr. Iller had first found Day's sleeping form, but the crystalline pod was gone now, replaced by a conference table that seemed to be carved from a single piece of starlight. The chamber itself had changed too, expanded beyond its original dimensions into something that existed in multiple spatial planes simultaneously. Day sat at the head of the table, no longer the confused sleeper, but something that radiated quiet authority. He wore simple clothes that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and his dark eyes held the patience of someone who had watched civilizations rise and fall. The ambassadors filed in like condemned prisoners, Chancellor Vrex representing the Zephyrian Republic, High Counselor Than from what remained of the Cristani Empire, Admiral Bex speaking for the broken hegemony, and a dozen others from smaller powers. They all shared the same expression of barely controlled terror. Dr. Iller stood beside Day, her role transformed from archaeologist to translator. She was the only non-human he seemed to trust, perhaps because she had tried to protect his people's heritage instead of destroying it. "Sit," Day said quietly, and the ambassadors obeyed with the speed of frightened children. Through the chamber's new transparent steel dome they could see the stars, but several constellations were noticeably dimmer now, their light blocked by the debris clouds that had once been proud fleets. "I don't want your worlds," Day began, his voice filling the chamber without echo. "I don't want your resources, your technology, or your submission. I want something far more valuable." The ambassadors leaned forward, desperate to hear terms they might actually be able to meet. "I want you to remember." Chancellor Vrex blinked in confusion. "Remember what?" "That humanity sleeps throughout this galaxy, that we have been here longer than your oldest civilizations, that we chose to sleep rather than rule, to hibernate rather than conquer." His gaze swept across the assembled representatives. "Remember what happens when you disturb us." He gestured toward the transparent steel dome where the dim stars told their own story. "Remember that this, the destruction of your fleets, the erasure of your military might, is what mercy looks like." Admiral Bex, his face pale with shock, found his voice. "Mercy? You destroyed millions of lives." "No," Day replied calmly. "I ended them instantly, without pain or suffering. True destruction would have involved allowing your crews to experience what they inflicted on my people's memory sites. The archaeological teams that were executed, the memorial worlds that were strip-mined, the historical sites that were turned into weapons testing grounds." The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of alien technology. Every ambassador understood the implication. What they had witnessed wasn't Day's full power. It was restraint. "The terms are simple," Day continued. "Every human site, every installation, every memorial world is now sacred ground. No mining, no military bases, no colonization. Your people will maintain complete historical records of humanity's existence. And most importantly, you will never attempt to locate other sleeper facilities." "Other facilities?" High Counselor Than whispered. Day smiled, and for the first time it held genuine warmth. "Did you think I was alone? Humanity spread far beyond the worlds you know about. We sleep in places you haven't discovered, in systems you haven't explored, in dimensions you can't perceive. Some of us are guardians like me, others—" His expression grew distant. "Others are far less merciful." He stood, and the ambassadors instinctively shrank back. "Accept these terms and your civilizations will continue to exist. Your people will live, grow, explore the galaxy as they always have. But you will do so with the knowledge that humanity watches, that we remember, that we protect what is ours." The voting was unanimous. Every representative agreed to the terms without hesitation, their signatures flowing across documents that wrote themselves in languages that shifted and changed as they watched. As the ambassadors prepared to leave, carrying the news of humanity's return to their respective governments, Day turned to Dr. Iller. "Will they keep their word?" she asked quietly. For a while, he replied. Long enough for the lesson to spread, long enough for parents to tell their children about the day the galaxy learned to fear the dark. He looked up at the stars through the dome, and Illa followed his gaze. In the distance, she could see monitoring stations materializing around major worlds, silent sentinels that would watch and wait. And when they forget? She asked. Day's smile returned, but this time it carried the weight of sleeping giants. Then we'll remind them again. As the last of the ambassadors departed, carrying humanity's terms to a galaxy that would never be the same, new installations flickered to life on distant worlds. Brief pulses of energy that said the same thing in every language. We are here. We are watching. We remember. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Now it remained to be seen how long that lesson would last.